welcome back. We'll now go on to Bellingham City Council's next committee, which is Lake Whatcom and Natural Resources Committee. Mr. Hamill is the chair.
Thank you. Joining me on the committee this afternoon is Gene Knutson, and I don't think we have a second because, and Councilmember Vargas. We have one item before us, Climate Action Plan update. The city's Climate Action Plan is updated to direct the next phase of emission reduction actions for both the city government and community-wide efforts. The updated plan summarizes actions taken to implement the 2007 Community Action Plan, reviews progress towards previously established reduction goals, reestablishes the emission reduction goals, and identifies additional measures that will reduce or further reduce emissions. And here to take us through this afternoon are Ted Carlson and Renee LaCroix.
Hi, Renee LaCroix, Public Works. As you just mentioned, we're here to present the 2017 Climate Action Plan update. Nate Rice, who currently works with Colshan Community Services, will be doing the presentation. And he has worked on this for the better part of 2 years, and he just last week defended his master's thesis on elk research. So you can also ask him questions about that. This is an update, like I mentioned. It looks at the 2007 Climate Action Plan and kind of takes the temperature of how we're doing in terms of our emissions reduction. The plan itself, we've had a goal of getting the plan to council by the end of this year, and so we're hoping to come back to you in December, probably on the second council meeting. I can't actually remember the date. With a work session, and so hopefully you'll have the plan before then. The plan is 90% finished, and it's well done. At this point, we're just working with the layout editor to increase readability and make it easier to digest. It's an interesting sort of plan because it's a real mix between a planning document, a geeky science document, and an inspirational plan. And sometimes it's challenging to get the right mix, and so we're taking the extra effort and the extra steps to make sure that we're presenting it something that is digestible for the public. So with that, I wanted to turn it over to Nate, and we're happy to take questions at the end.
Thanks, Renee. Good afternoon, council members. Thanks for the opportunity to present to you today. As Renee said, my name is Nathan Rice. I work for a local consulting firm called Colshan Services, and we were hired to update the Climate Action Plan, and today I'm going to present the results of that update. So I'll start with some quick background on the Climate Action Plan and then talk about emissions reduction results to date, and then get into municipal and community emissions trends, the targets that we proposed going forward, forecasts of emissions that allow us to plan our reduction measures to meet those targets in the future. So in 2005, City Council passed the Cities for Climate Protection campaign and committed to its 5 milestones, which resulted in the development of the Climate Protection Action Plan. And the city has completed those 5 milestones, and so this plan update represents a continuation of this process with new greenhouse gas inventories to monitor our progress towards goals made in the 2007 plan and to establish new reduction targets going forward. The Climate Protection Action Plan was passed by City Council in 2007, and that plan and this plan update serve as guiding document for how Bellingham can reduce its climate impact. The plan includes estimates of emissions and emission reduction opportunities and proposes measures that in many cases are not fully scoped at this point. But the 2007 plan and this as well represent an intersection of science, planning, and practice, and set emissions targets at the municipal level at 64% below 2000 emissions levels by 2012 and 70% by 2020. And at the community level, the goal was 7% below 2000 levels by 2012 and 28% by 2020. So the plan has been implemented in 4 phases, with phase 4 being those measures that are proposed in this updated plan. Emissions inventories are a comprehensive accounting of greenhouse gas emissions sources over time and are used to track progress over time. So we now have 4 inventory years starting in 2000, which is the baseline inventory against which we measure progress. And inventories are calculated at two scales: at the municipal scale, which consists of city government operations, and then at the community scale, which is within city limits. So this 2017 update included a number of steps, including starting to use a next-generation emissions management software called ClearPath. And in ClearPath, I recalculated the 2000 and 2005 inventories to be consistent with updated protocols, and then calculated emissions inventories for 2012 and 2015 to assess progress. And then we have a new emissions forecast to 2030 to plan for new reduction targets and measures to reach those targets. I also reported on past emissions reduction measures, and in the process worked with city staff, ICLEI staff, and Puget Sound Energy, Cascade Natural Gas staff to gather and interpret energy data. I also consulted with Sustainable Connections and energy experts from Western and the community. Results thus far show that Bellingham exceeded 2012 targets at both the municipal and community levels, as shown in the green bar. This has been possible by implementing dozens of mostly ongoing and long-term measures, as well as some short-term measures that have been completed. The third row shows an increase in emissions from 2012, and some year-to-year variability is expected due to weather and other factors. That was a particularly hot summer, so it may have been due to more use of air conditioning than usual. And I'll discuss 2030 and 2050 targets in a later slide. So some of the highlights to date for Bellingham Climate Action at the municipal level include green power purchases. These are also known as renewable energy credits, or RECs. So the city has been purchasing these since 2006 to offset all municipal electricity use. LED streetlights were also a big effort over the last couple years and result in big energy and emission savings. Resource conservation management, the city has contracted for audits of building energy to prioritize energy efficiency measures. At the community level, again, green power purchases across the community, both by other governments like the county government and Western Washington University, as well as Puget Sound Energy customers. The Community Energy Challenge has continued to improve energy efficiency across the community, and solar installations. Bellingham has been a statewide leader in installing solar with the help of the city's permitting incentives. So zooming in on municipal emissions in 2015, our most recent inventory. This chart shows the breakdown of municipal emissions by municipal sector. And you can see the sewer utility emits 40% of all municipal emissions. A large source of those emissions is the biosolids incinerators, and I'll talk about measures to reduce those emissions later. Buildings and facilities is the second largest emitter at 28% from electricity and natural gas use. And also of note is that streetlights and traffic signals emissions are down by 76% compared to 2000 levels, thanks to those LED upgrades I mentioned. This graph shows municipal emissions trends over time based on emissions inventories. So the y-axis is tons of carbon dioxide equivalent, which is a measure of the three main greenhouse gases: carbon dioxide, methane, and nitrous oxide. The x-axis is years starting in 2000, which is our baseline year. And the green line shows calculated emissions inventories over time. That yellow dashed line shows the 2012 and 2020 targets from the 2007 plan, and the dashed red line shows the no action forecast without the climate action plan. So you can see the dramatic decrease in emissions between 2005 and 2012, with the implementation of the 2007 plan. Most of this decrease is from the city's purchase of renewable energy credits, as I mentioned. So electricity emissions are not included in the 2012 and 2015 points on the green line, and this was the assumption that was made in the 2007 plan when these goals were set. So you can see that the city exceeded the 2012 goal and is on track to meet the 2020 goal if we continue to reduce emissions. Here are community emissions from 2015. This is a pretty comparable distribution of emissions across sectors to other cities. Transportation is the largest contributor at 36%, followed by residential and commercial, both at 24%. And this community inventory includes municipal emissions, which make up about 2% of the total. So this shows community emissions trends over time. Again, you can see the green line shows the community met its 2012 target, and then emissions increased in 2015, which could make it harder to meet the 2020 target. So here are proposed emissions reduction targets in the blue, and this is adding on to that table we looked at before. So we're introducing these new targets proposed for 2030, which is an 85% decrease from 2000 levels at the municipal scale, and then a 40% decrease at the community scale. And for 2050, 100% decrease in emissions from 2000 levels at the municipal level, and 85% decrease at the community level, which follows the Department of Ecology recommendation. Okay, this shows municipal emissions forecast from 2015 out to 2030. And this is a graph from the ClearPath software, hence the slightly different format. Note that this includes electricity emissions so that we can track performance of energy efficiency measures, even as we continue to purchase green power to offset electricity emissions. Similarly, the y-axis is carbon dioxide equivalent, the x-axis is years. That blue line on top represents a no-action forecast with no reductions. And then the dotted lines show the 2020 and 2030 emissions goals with electricity emissions added in. So these colored bars represent emissions from each municipal sector, which you can see decrease over time. So starting on top in the green is employee commute. There's a small dark blue line below that represents solid waste, and then orange is vehicle fleet. Building and facilities is in yellow, and then streetlights and traffic signals, and the big purple bar at the bottom is water and wastewater treatment facilities. So reductions are estimated from ongoing and proposed emissions reduction measures in the plan. And for example, you can see out at 2025, that big reduction represents the post-point resource recovery measure that's now in planning stages. So these emissions reduction measures are categorized into 6 core strategies: energy efficiency and conservation, renewable energy, transportation, green building, waste reduction, and land use. And at the municipal level, there are 12 ongoing and proposed measures represented in that forecast graph we just looked at. The green direct power purchase will begin in 2019, and this will replace the current renewable energy credits with a more direct investment in an actual physical wind turbine on the Columbia Gorge. So basically this allows us to put more renewable energy on the grid than by purchasing renewable energy credits. Note that this is actually not included in that forecast, since we are tracking electricity emissions in the forecast. Like I mentioned previously, the post-point resource recovery is in its planning stages and will replace the biosolids incinerators, likely with anaerobic digesters. This would allow for methane to be captured and reused on site, resulting in major emissions reductions. And then facilities management involves a variety of energy efficiency and conservation measures. The city has budgeted for a new building engineer position to work on this effort. There are additional LED upgrades to be made across the city facilities, and fleet management includes a number of measures, including purchasing hybrid and electric vehicles. Okay, looking at the community level forecast out to 2030 again. We've got 5 community sectors: commercial energy, industrial energy, solid waste, transportation and mobile sources, and residential energy. And so this forecast misses the 2020 emissions target, but with committed action across the community, it is possible to meet the 2030 goal. So community emissions reduction opportunities include 36 ongoing and proposed measures in that forecast we looked at. And highlights include, again, green power community purchases, promoting hybrid and electric cars, which the city can do through education and outreach, permitting incentives for EV charging infrastructure, and ongoing tax incentives. Some of this growth will occur naturally as the market shifts to electric vehicles. Residential energy efficiency includes a number of measures such as the Community Energy Challenge, as well as new measures, proposed measures like residential energy ratings that could allow renters and home buyers to see how efficient homes are before deciding where to live. The vehicle mode shift goal is set by city transportation planners and seeks to reduce single occupancy vehicle trips. And then industrial energy efficiency is another sector that the city can work on potentially through permanent incentive programs. Puget Sound Energy also has a program that works with industrial customers. So we welcome feedback from City Council on this plan update, and we'd welcome input also on how to take public comment on the plan. Like Renee said, we'll be back on the 13th to report with a complete plan.
Thank you. Thanks for the presentation.
Take any questions or comments?
Okay. Committee members. Councilmember Vargas.
Thank you for that overview.
Yeah.
I'm really excited by this information. I'm also excited to know that the sewer utility, the 40% of our municipal emissions, that's going to go away. I didn't realize how significant that was to us. That's pretty huge.
Definitely won't go away.
Well,
It would be reduced.
reduced because we won't have the combustion, we won't be burning, right?
Yeah, so it's moving from incineration to anaerobic digestion will definitely reduce the emissions. And if you go back to that slide, Nate, you can see in 2025, that's when we're anticipating it being online. It will not reduce it all the way. They won't go away, but it will greatly reduce it. It's an exciting project. It certainly will allow us to use the heat for both the process itself of heating the digesters, but also at the plant. So it is a great opportunity. We'll still have the need for electricity throughout the system to operate all of our pumps and also operate all the pumps and things at Post Point, but it is a great opportunity.
That is good. A couple other things, if I may, if that's all right. One, I'm really glad that we are doing this. A lot of people ask all the time, why is a climate action plan important? Well, it's our strategy. It's how we make our decisions and knowing how to prioritize things, like knowing how impactful our incinerator is. I think these are the things that help us make us decisions on where our money should go to match what our plan is in regards to reduction. So it is our strategy, for anybody who's wondering what a climate action plan is for. A couple things I'm happy that the city is going to do right now. One, to get an energy management engineer, because buildings and facilities is still at 28%. That is our, something we can absolutely do something about. So I'd like for us to make sure that when we're going through this process that we are measuring where our highest carbon reduction opportunities are and matching those to our budget. So when we're looking at the things that are actually affecting our carbon reduction, to ensure that we're supporting those with our budget, with our dollars. And buildings and facilities, changing our lights, particularly in this room, is really important. So I just, I want to say that also that I'm happy we're going to do Green Direct, but I'm also glad that we are measuring electricity emissions because RECs are only mitigation. They are not reduction. Important, but not apples and apples. So I like that we're measuring our electricity emissions. That makes me really happy. Let me see if there was anything else. Oh, just the question on ensuring that the focus on what we can reduce is we look at the priority and match those with our budget. So ensuring that we are going to put money towards actually making some of these things happen in a more efficient manner.
Council members? Councilmember Barker, then Lillquist.
The community action highlights that you have for date on slide 8, it looks like you do include green power purchases, and I think in the community there's other voluntary programs that people can decide to join in on. Do we also track those and the potential of those to add them into what we're targeting, but also what we meet?
In terms of green power or some kind of renewable energy credit? Yeah, I've done my best to gather that information. There's a number of, like you say, other companies that sell those kind of credits. So I've been able to glean some of that information where other businesses are purchasing it as well. Mm-hmm. Okay. But I can't claim to have all of those added up into the forecast, but most of them, I think.
Okay.
Councilmember Lillquist.
Yes. Well, first, I want to echo comments of Councilmember Vargas. I'm glad to see that we're moving towards having a on-staff resource conservation management type position. The recent audit showed that we have enormous room for energy savings in how we manage our buildings, and that will take us a great deal towards what I would call kind of genuine savings, the harder to make savings where you actually use less energy. What you did, I think, was very appropriate, where you sometimes included electricity, sometimes not. To look at what we're actually consuming, you have to look at our energy. To look at our emissions, you can sort of like back it out and say, oh, we're buying green energy, so we don't need to count it. But we kind of still do need to count it. I think we made so much progress municipally just because we purchased the conservation credits, and so that last portion is going to be hardest to achieve. I kind of want to ask a question about that. Proposed target 2050 down 100%. That means an effective zero emissions in 2050. That's with the the energy credits, right? And
yes.
Those energy credits, would they be truly zero energy production by some completely renewable source, and then in our own case not using zero energy, but again we're using energy, but it's just renewable or net zero on carbon? What does 0% actually mean in 2050?
Yeah, so you're right that would definitely include renewable energy credits, as you mentioned, and with the Green Direct, it is an improvement over the RECs in the sense that it's a much more direct investment, and we can get more additional renewable energy onto the grid rather than RECs, which are essentially just a less direct investment in that. Mm-hmm. So the 2050 goal hasn't been mapped out the way that the 2030 goal has in looking at the forecasts. So it's an aspirational goal, and I think it's something to shoot for sure, and dozens of other cities, comparable cities across the country, are going for that. So it's going to require, big changes that are not going to be entirely in the city's control, but in terms of, improving greening the grid much more deeply, getting more local renewable energy investment, and obviously greening the fleet of vehicles across the community. So, like I say, that is much more of an aspirational goal than the 2030 goal in terms of actually quantifying how to get there at this point.
So to be clear, I am 100% in favor of an aspirational goal of 100% reduction. I think we need to be shooting that far. And I think the city may have an easier chance of getting there because we're kind of just a smaller, it's a smaller universe to consider. The community goals, I think, are going to be harder to reach. And of course, they're not directly in our control. That's each and every citizen, each and every business, and how they run their operation. I am looking at new technologies that allow for on-site energy production, most of it photovoltaic, that can be done locally in our climate. I don't just mean solar panels. I mean a lot of other means of capturing energy. I think this really, really is doable by 2050. That is a long way away. I think we could actually achieve that by 2035 or 2040. If we saw it in our best interest, and I guess what I'm saying is I think the public should see it in our best interest. I think we should be shooting for higher goals. We're seeing the consequences now of the air pollution, of the emissions. I think we need to be shooting very ambitiously, so thank you.
Councilmember Vargas.
One more question. I'm wondering how much, I should probably know this, our climate action plans are overlaid into permitting and to development, et cetera, in regards to what we're asking people when they're putting in new facilities, those kinds of things. I'm kind of wondering how that overlaps. Does that make sense, what I'm saying? Okay.
So I know our energy code, the Bellingham Energy Code, has been has considered climate change in what we currently require single-family residences and other developments to do. I'm not well versed in it, and maybe Ted has more information.
I think that's accurate. Another one to look at in terms of how we regulate would be related to the transportation side and the mode shift goals. When we look at our development requirements for sidewalk, bike lane, multimodal facilities, when we look at how we establish our transportation impact fees in areas like urban villages where you get reductions if you build a certain way, all of that takes into consideration our desire to limit vehicles on the roadway to help us meet these mode shift goals and ultimately meet our emissions reduction goals. So that's a specific way that some of this is captured in our rules and regulations. There's probably more as we go through, as Renee mentioned, looking at building code, other land use related things. Some of the things, as was mentioned earlier, just aren't as much in the city's control. Mostly as you look at those community goals that people aren't coming to the city for permits, people aren't coming to us for any way that we can actually dictate what they do, but rather it's through educational efforts and some of the outreach that we've done with our partners through things like the Community Energy Challenge and events like that. So we can try to dive into that a little bit more, perhaps on the 13th.
Councilmember Barker.
Yeah. So as I think you said at the end, you're looking for information on how to go out or suggestions for public input. Are you looking at that after you do our update on the 13th? Is that what I understand it's coming? Or are you asking right now for, are we going to have some of that community input and information before we start giving you some feedback? Or are you planning on doing that after we give you feedback?
I don't think we have it nailed down exactly. We'd like to hear what council has to say and go through that work session with you on December 11th. I did look up the date. So after that, I think we can talk about how we move it forward in the community.
After that? Okay. I'm also, I'm hoping that we're going to have plenty of time in that council meeting because having just, I'm trying to formulate my questions, but having, this is the first time I've seen the slides to be able to put the things that I'm thinking about into words are going to be difficult. So for Michael or whomever's committee that's going to be in, I think we need to leave a significant amount of time to discuss. As I think also I was wondering, since one, this is based on comprehensive plan data, I would assume, like on what our projected growth is, so how many employees, those things. So in these plans, if we start noticing a trend or a shift in that, does that automatically have these plans get updated sooner than later if we start maybe overreaching our goals in the comp plan?
I think moving forward, we'll be on it. We'll update this plan every 3 to 5 years is what we're aiming for, to do it on a regular basis. Okay. And the information from the comp plan and the growth projections are factored into the calculations, and so that's part of the challenge, is knowing that we are expecting growth and still trying to bring our targets down.
Yeah, and then will there be staff policy direction as you look at the goals that we're looking to meet, or are those for us to try to determine?
I think that's part of the conversation.
Okay.
We, in one of the slides, talked about areas where we know we need to make some gains, and our fleet being one of them, how we best go about doing that.
Okay, thank you, Renee.
Okay. We're pretty far over time, but I do want to ask just one quick question here. Will the changes to the wastewater, the Post Point facility, from the biosolid incinerators to the anaerobic digesters, provide any financial benefit as well as the reduced emissions?
There will be revenue potentially, maybe in a future phase, and we'll talk a lot more about that project moving forward. As was mentioned, we're in pretty early phases. We've done a couple presentations to council, but some of the concepts would be you'd have an end product after the digestion that could be marketed for soil amendments, fertilizers. That would have a revenue stream, but in talking to other utilities that are much, much further along and have implemented a marketing product that's doing very well, it still doesn't actually even pay for that portion of the operation. So the bagging or the composting effort, the revenue from selling the product helps offset that component, but not necessarily a significant or any portion of the treatment process itself. So there's revenue to help with some of those extra benefits that we'd like to see, because there's certainly an advantage to keeping it local and having a beneficial use, but not a substantial revenue stream.
Okay, thank you.
Just really quick before you go, we typically only get this very large document, like usually the Thursday before. Are you going to be on track to probably give it to us maybe at the beginning of December so we can have time to?
We will do our best, but honestly, I think we'll try and have it to you the weekend before the council meeting. Right, so this whole year we've been saying we'll have it to you by the end of the year, and we're going to make that commitment, but I don't anticipate that we're going to be able to have it to you any earlier.
But I would offer up that there is no deadline for this plan. This is entirely a city plan, a council plan. We would be happy to provide the document to you and then schedule something after the first of the year. Although we have heard that you wanted to have this by the end of the year several times, so we wanted to respect that and get the plan to you. We're happy to provide the plan and hold the work session later, if that's helpful. It's the council's pleasure. We're certainly not trying to rush it or limit the comments. We could introduce it on, get it to you prior to your meeting on the 11th, have kind of an informational introductory work session where we go into a little bit more detail in the plan, and then happy to come back after the first of the year and have a second work session. However many times we'd like to discuss it is absolutely fine.
Thank you.
All right.
I think, sorry, go ahead. Can I comment? I think I'm in agreement with April. I really wanted the 27 plan to be updated in 2017, a nice 10-year number, but I prefer that we maybe took a little longer, even if the deadline slips. So I don't know. The council can decide that when it comes forward, if we want to approve it as it comes forward or chew on it a while.
Okay. End of committee.